Welcome to CSS Breakdown Book by Book, Season 07, Episode 18, where we dive into Chapter 18 of Introduction to Psychology 15th Edition by Atkinson and Hilgard. It's a chapter that reveals why our thoughts and judgments about others aren't just, idle musings, but powerful forces shaping our world and relationships. Today we're unpacking social cognition, exploring how we perceive, think about, and judge other people and ourselves. What's truly fascinating is how these mental processes don't just help us pass the time, they have real, tangible consequences in your daily life and in society at large.
That's absolutely right. I mean, think about it from how you instantly categorize maybe a new university classmate, deciding if they might be a friend or someone to avoid, all the way to broader historical events rooted in widespread generalizations and the impact they have on how entire communities are viewed. Our social cognitions are incredibly powerful. This deep dive will really get inside our heads to show you just how much they shape your reality.
Okay, so when we talk about social cognition, what exactly are we getting at? What does that term really mean for us?
Well, social psychology itself is all about how people's behavior and their mental processes are shaped by the real or even just imagined presence of others. Social cognition specifically is the study of how we interpret our social experiences and how we think about the social world around us.
And I hear there are two very different modes of thinking involved here. Can you shed some light on that?
Absolutely. Social psychologists have identified two fundamental modes. The first is automatic and unintentional. This thinking often happens outside our conscious awareness. It's quick, effortless.
Like a reflex almost.
Yeah, think of it like your brain's reflex system for social information. The second is controlled and deliberate. This mode requires your full awareness, effort, and attention. It's the thoughtful, analytical part of your brain.
So what does this distinction mean for how our minds actually work when we're, interacting with others? Why does it matter which mode we're in?
Well, whether our thinking is on automatic pilot or is a more controlled, deliberate process, it profoundly influences how our minds shape our social behavior and reactions. We're going to see this fundamental distinction play out repeatedly today. I mean, from how we form first impressions,
Right.
to the attitudes we hold, and even to the complex realm of interpersonal attraction.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our initial impressions of people are so critical, aren't they?
Yeah.
How do we even begin to form them, and why do they carry so much weight?
Impression formation begins the very instant we encounter someone new. It's a critical area because those first judgments influence everything, whether we interact with them at all, how we treat them, and how quickly we size them up.
And that often leads us straight to stereotypes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We hear a lot about them, but how do they fit into this idea of social cognition?
Right. Stereotypes are essentially schemas, mental frameworks, or organized bundles of beliefs and knowledge we have about classes of people. Just like we have mental categories for objects like food versus drink, we categorize people by salient attributes.
Like race, gender, age.
Exactly. Or by social identity, what we call us versus them. They allow us to process vast amounts of information very efficiently.
Which can be useful sometimes.
It can, actually. It saves mental energy.
But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. How do these stereotypes become so automatic, almost invisible, in our minds? And how do we even know they're operating automatically?
That's a great question. Through repeated exposure, stereotypes become, overlearned and automatic, operating outside conscious awareness. We see this demonstrated in experiments using priming techniques.
Right, where they subtly expose people to something.
Exactly, to see how it influences their thoughts or behavior, often without them even realizing it. For instance, there's a classic scrambled sentence test. Participants unknowingly read words associated with elderly stereotypes like old or retired. And what's truly surprising is that afterwards, they actually walked more slowly down a hallway.
Really? Just from reading the words?
Just from reading the words, completely unaware that the words had influenced their pace. It shows how deep this priming can go. And it's not just experiments. Even just watching a lot of TV or movies can be a major source. Exposure to media stereotypes of women as, say, sex objects has been shown to lead men to ask more sexist questions in job interviews.
Wow.
And behave in a more sexualized manner.
Yeah.
And other studies found that even incredibly brief, like subliminal exposure to black faces made non-black participants react with more hostility to a computer error.
Even if they didn't consciously hold racist views.
Exactly. Even if they didn't consciously endorse those attitudes, it shows the automatic activation of stereotypes about hostility. accountability. Another fascinating aspect is automatic evaluation. Just categorizing others as outgroup versus in-group can automatically trigger negative associations and speed up our responses to negative words.
So our brains are kind of pre-wired to be wary of the other.
Brain imaging suggests something like that initially. It reveals immediate activity in the amygdala, that's our brain's sort of alarm center when we see unfamiliar faces. This activity lessens for faces we categorize as in-group, but remains high for out-group faces, suggesting an initial perception of, maybe, threat.
So while efficient, these automatic stereotypes come with a price.
Oh, definitely. They introduce significant biases in our perception, memory, and even how we infer things about people.
Can you give an example of that bias in action?
Sure. Think about the primacy effect. The Jim story illustrates this. The first information we receive about someone has a greater impact than later information. If Jim's friendly traits were described first, people saw him as friendly even if contradictory info came later.
First impressions really stick them.
They really do. Solomon Ash's study on Sam showed this too. Just changing one word describing Sam as warm versus cold, alongside other traits like intelligent, skillful, dramatically changed how people inferred other traits, like his generosity. Advanced reputations are hard to shake.
And this plays out with gender and race too, right?
Absolutely. Stereotypes shape how we interpret success, like a male math test taker is seen as smart, while a female might be seen as lucky. Or aggression, a black man might be perceived as aggressive, whereas a white man doing the same thing might be seen as provoked.
So we selectively notice or dismiss information based on the stereotype.
Exactly. Information consistent with a stereotype is seen as diagnostic, telling us something real about the person. Inconsistent info often gets dismissed or explained away, and tragically, this can have life or death consequences. The Amadou Diallo case, where police officers mistakenly identified his wallet as a gun.
I remember that. Terrible.
It illustrates this potential split-second weapon bias that can activate stereotypes and influence decisions, even when people are actively trying not to be biased.
So we're essentially filtering reality through these pre-existing mental shortcuts. Which leads to the next point. What about the idea that stereotypes can become a self-fulfilling prophecy? They don't just stay in our heads.
You've hit on a crucial point. They absolutely don't just reside in our heads. They leak out into our actions, inadvertently creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
How does that work?
Well, think about it. If you assume a student from a neighboring university is, say, a snob, and you act coldly towards her, she'll likely reciprocate your coldness, which then confirms your initial and possibly completely wrong belief.
You create the reality you expected.
Precisely. Research has even shown this in job interviews. White interviewers who, perhaps unconsciously, acted less friendly towards black applicants ended up rating those applicants' performance lower. It suggests the interviewer's initial bias actually evoked behaviors from the applicants that seemed to confirm their stereotypes.
Wow. And this can even affect how people perform based on stereotypes about their own group.
Yes, that's a powerful phenomenon called stereotype threat. For instance, studies found black students performed worse on tests when subtly reminded of stereotypes about intellectual inferiority, but performed just as well as white students when no stereotype was activated.
And the same for women and math tests.
Exactly the same effect. It seems to raise anxiety, which reduces working memory capacity and just degrades performance.
Is there any good news here? Can anything counteract stereotype threat?
There is some hope. Research suggests that simply learning about stereotype threat can help eliminate its negative effects. Awareness seems to be key.
That's a lot to take in. These automatic, powerful stereotypes really influence so much. So the big question is, can we ever truly see someone for who they are? By the content of their character, as Martin Luther King Jr. hoped? Or are we always kind of trapped by these mental shortcuts?
We absolutely can. It's possible. This is what psychologists call individuation. It means assessing a person's personal qualities on a person-by-person basis, really moving beyond the group label. It typically requires more thoughtful, controlled thinking, though.
So moving from that automatic mode to the deliberate one.
Exactly. The continuum model is a really helpful way to visualize this. It shows how we can move from automatic stereotyping towards individuation. So the initial categorization based on gender, ethnicity, age happens in milliseconds, super fast.
Right, the automatic part.
But then, if the person has personal relevance to us, say they're a potential roommate or colleague, we start to allocate more attention. We pay closer attention. Then we might try to confirm our initial categories or find narrower, more precise ones. That's recategorization.
Like shifting from typical 20-year-old guy to hardworking student.
Precisely. And then when we have ample information and enough motivation, like we really want to get to know this person, we can engage in piecemeal integration. That's where we truly take in all the available information, integrating the pieces and judging them by the content of their character. It takes effort.
Can we actively promote individuation? Are there ways to encourage it?
Yes. One powerful strategy is structured, cooperative contact between different groups, working together towards a common goal. For example, studies showed that students who cooperated on a task with someone they knew was a former mental patient formed far more positive, individualized impressions. And importantly, these favorable impressions even generalized to other former patients.
So positive contact helps break down those category barriers.
It really does. And on an individual level, you can consciously override stereotypes if you meet certain conditions. You need to be aware of their potential negative influence. You need to be genuinely motivated to reduce prejudice.
You have to want to do it.
Right. And you need to have enough mental resources, enough attentional capacity to engage in that deliberate thinking. It takes effort, but it's definitely possible.
Okay, so moving beyond just forming those initial impressions, we're also constantly trying to understand why people behave the way they do, aren't we?
Yeah.
Like, why would a famous athlete endorse a shoe brand? Is it really because they love the shoes, or is there another reason driving that behavior?
Precisely. This is attribution, our intuitive attempts to infer the causes of behavior. A major task here is deciding if an action comes from an internal or dispositional attribution, something about the person, like their beliefs, their personality.
Like the athlete just genuinely loves the shoes.
Right. Or if it comes from an external or situational attribution, something about the circumstances.
Like the huge paycheck they're getting.
Exactly. Money, social norms, pressure strokes. Those are situational factors.
And that leads us to the fundamental attribution error. I've heard that term. What is it, and why do we commit it so often in our daily lives?
The fundamental attribution error. It's our pervasive, really quite strong tendency to underestimate situational influences and overemphasize dispositional factors when explaining other people's behavior.
We jump to conclusions about the person.
We really do. For example, in classic studies, participants read a debater's speech, maybe pro or con Castro, even when they were told the debater's side was assigned, meaning they had no choice. Participants still inferred that the debater's true attitude matched the speech.
They completely ignored the situation.
They did. They ignored that powerful situational constraint. Or think about the classic quiz game experiment. Questioners made up incredibly difficult questions based on their own unique knowledge. Naturally, the contestants struggled.
Yeah, that seems unfair.
It was designed to be.
Yeah.
But both the contestants and observers rated the questioners as generally more knowledgeable. They totally ignored the massive situational advantage the questioners had. It's a powerful demonstration of this error.
So why do we do this? Why is it so fundamental?
Well, the thinking is that the first step of attribution, inferring a disposition, blaming the person, is more automatic. It's quicker, easier. Correcting for the situation, considering external factors, that's a second, more effortful step.
Back to the two modes of thinking.
Exactly. So when you're cognitively busy, maybe you're planning something, anticipating an interaction, managing your own impression, or just distracted, you're far more likely to skip that second step and commit this error.
That's fascinating. It really makes you question how much of our everyday judgments are truly fair. And it raises another important question. Are these deep-seated cognitive processes universal? Or are they shaped by the culture we grow up in?
That's where things get really interesting. Cutting-edge research is seriously challenging the long-held assumption of universality. It turns out different social systems actually seem to create or at least foster distinct ways of thinking.
How so?
For example, some early cross-cultural studies showed that while Americans readily make those dispositional attributions we just talked about, Hindu Indians and Chinese people often preferred situational explanations for behavior. They looked more to the context.
Interesting. Any more recent examples?
Yeah, a study comparing Koreans and Americans found that Koreans were less likely to make the fundamental attribution error if they had a chance to sort of walk in the shoes of the person whose behavior they were judging. It suggests that East Asians might be more sensitive to contexts, especially when those contexts are made really clear or salient.
So this points towards different thinking styles.
It does. This ties into what researchers call holistic versus analytic thinking. East Asians tend to engage more in holistic thinking. That means focusing on the broader context, seeing relationships between objects rather than isolating them, and often using dialectical reasoning, which can embrace contradiction.
Okay, and the alternative.
Westerners, on the other hand, tend to engage more in analytic thinking. This involves focusing on objects detached from their context, relying more on formal logic, and generally trying to avoid contradiction.
And where do these differences come from?
Well, the idea is that these differences might trace back thousands of years to ancient cultural practices and philosophies. Think about collectivist cultures, like the traditional Chinese focus on social harmony and interdependence, versus individualist cultures, like the ancient Greek emphasis on personal agency and independence.
So our brains aren't just universally wired for thinking in one way. They're actually shaped by millennia of cultural influence. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. It makes you reconsider so much. As one leading scholar in the field put it, psychologists who don't do cross-cultural psychology might just be acting as ethnographers of a single culture.
Wow. It really puts our own assumptions into perspective.
Definitely.
Okay, that's a fantastic point. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about attitudes, our likes and dislikes.
Yeah.
Why are these so central to understanding social behavior?
Attitudes are fundamental. They're simply our favorable or unfavorable evaluations of, well, anything, objects, people, ideas. They generally have three components we look at. There's a cognitive component, which is our beliefs.
Like grapefruit has vitamin C.
Exactly. Then there's an affective component, which is our feelings.
I love grapefruit.
Right. And finally, a behavioral component, which involves our actions.
I eat grapefruit every morning. Got it.
So the underlying assumption for a long time was that our attitudes reliably predict our behavior, right?
Yeah, that seems intuitive. If you want to change behavior, you change attitudes first. Is that always true in the messy reality of daily life?
That assumption was actually vigorously questioned for quite a while in psychology. There's a classic challenge from the 1930s, Lapierre's study. He traveled across the U.S. with a Chinese couple during a time of significant anti-Chinese prejudice.
Okay.
Despite that widespread prejudice, only 1 out of over 200 hotels and restaurants refused them service face-to-face.
Only one? That's surprising.
Very. But here's the twist. When Lapierre later sent letters to those same establishments asking if they would serve a Chinese couple, a whopping 92% said no, they would not.
Wow. So their expressed attitude was completely different from their actual behavior.
Dramatically different. It highlights how our behavior is often constrained by the immediate situation. Think about it. We might eat vegetables we detest at a dinner party to be polite, or attend a boring lecture because it's required.
Or conform in Ashley's line judgment study.
Exactly. Or deliver shocks in Milgram's obedience experiment. Or, like in Lapierre's study, a prejudiced proprietor might not act on their bias when faced with actual people. The situation matters.
So, if attitudes don't always predict behavior, when do they? When is that link strongest?
Good question. Attitudes predict behavior best under certain conditions. First, when they are strong and consistent, meaning you feel clear about them, there's less internal conflict or ambivalence.
Makes sense.
They're also more predictive when they are specifically related to the behavior you're trying to predict. For example, your specific attitude toward, say, nuclear weapons will predict whether you join an anti-nuclear protest much better than a general attitude toward war.
Specificity matter.
It does. Also, attitudes based on direct experience tend to be more powerful predictors. Students who actually lived in crowded temporary housing, for instance, were far more likely to act on their negative attitudes toward the housing crisis than students who only heard about it secondhand.
Experience makes it real.
Right. And finally, awareness plays a role. People who are more aware of their own attitudes, maybe because they're thinking about them, or even literally standing in front of a mirror, are more likely to act consistently with those attitudes.
Okay, so if attitudes can predict behavior sometimes, and they can be changed, how does persuasive communication actually work? How do people try to shift our opinions?
Persuasion. The elaboration likelihood model, or ELM, is a really influential framework here. It explains when persuasive messages work and, importantly, how they work. It proposes 2 main routes to persuasion, depending on your elaboration likelihood.
Elaboration likelihood. What's that?
It's basically how motivated and how able you are to think deeply to elaborate on the message you're receiving.
Okay, so two routes depending on how much thinking we're doing.
Exactly. If you're motivated and able to think deeply about the message's content, you take the central route. You really dig into the substantive arguments, you think about them. If your own thoughts generated by the message support the position, you're persuaded.
And if your thoughts argue against it,
Then you resist persuasion. Crucially, this is essentially self-persuasion. Your own thoughts are more influential than the message itself.
okay, that's the central route, deep thinking. What's the other route?
The other is the peripheral route. This happens when you're unwilling or unable to think deeply. Maybe you're distracted, tired, or the topic just doesn't feel relevant to you. Here, you respond to non-content cues, peripheral cues.
Like what kind of cues?
Things like classical conditioning. Advertisers pairing their product with attractive people or positive images, hoping the good feelings transfer. Or simple heuristics, which are mental rules of thumb.
Shortcuts again?
Yep. Like, if there are many arguments, it must be valid, or experts are always right, or even just, this person speaking is really attractive, so I should agree.
So you're not really engaging with the arguments themselves.
Not deeply, no. You're swayed by superficial aspects.
Which route we take seems pretty critical then. What determines it?
Personal involvement is a key factor. How relevant is the message to you? There was a classic study. University students heard an essay proposing a new comprehensive exam requirement. For students who were told the exam would start next year, that's high involvement, right? It directly affects them soon.
Right, they pay attention.
And they did. They took the central route. Strong arguments were highly persuasive. Weak arguments were not. More strong arguments led to more agreement, but more weak arguments actually led to less agreement because they picked them apart.
Okay, so they were really thinking. What about the low involvement group?
The students told the exam was 10 years away, low involvement, they took the peripheral route. Argument strength didn't matter at all. What mattered was simply the number of arguments.
Seriously?
Yes. More arguments, even if they were weak, were more persuasive. They just used the heuristic. More arguments equals a better case. Quality was irrelevant.
Wow. That really shows how knowing your audience's motivation and capacity to think deeply is crucial if you're trying to persuade them.
Absolutely essential.
So if we're constantly bombarded with these attempts at persuasion, especially via the peripheral route, how do we resist it effectively? What's the best defense?
The most effective resistance strategy identified by research is counter-arguing, directly rebutting the message in your own mind. Actively thinking, well, that's not right because, or they're ignoring this point. There's compelling evidence for this. Educational programs designed to teach adolescents how to generate counter-arguments against, say, peer pressure to smoke, significantly reduced actual smoking rates later on. It empowers you to actively push back against the message.
So engaging that central route, that deliberate thinking, is key to resistance.
Exactly. Don't just passively accept, actively engage and question.
All right, now for maybe one of psychology's most universally fascinating topics, interpersonal attraction. Why are we drawn to certain people? Is it pure magic, or is there some science to liking and loving?
Yes, attraction. It's definitely a complex mix of cognition and emotion. And while some findings confirm what we might call common knowledge, there are also quite a few surprises in the research.
So let's start with just liking someone, that initial attraction.
Yeah.
What factors play a role?
Well, first, let's talk about physical attractiveness. People often downplay its importance in surveys, saying personality matters more.
Yeah, you hear that all the time.
But actual behavior often tells a different story. The famous computer dance study from the 60s is a classic example. They randomly paired college students for a dance date. Afterwards, the only thing that predicted how much they liked their date and if they wanted to see them again was physical attractiveness.
Only attractiveness.
Yeah.
Not intelligence, not personality compatibility.
In that initial encounter, nope. Only physical attractiveness mattered significantly. And follow-up research suggests this holds true for subsequent dates and even influences marriage satisfaction, at least initially.
That's a bit unsettling, maybe.
Yeah.
But important to acknowledge.
It is. There's also a funny twist. Being seen with attractive companions can enhance your own social standing and self-esteem. But you might actually be rated less favorably yourself if your companion is significantly more attractive than you are.
Suffering by comparison.
Seems like it. We're complex creatures.
Okay, beyond looks, what else predicts who we end up liking or becoming friends with?
Proximity. Literally how close people live or work together. It's arguably the single best predictor of friendship formation.
Just being physically near someone.
Yep. Classic studies done in apartment buildings, like MIT's Westgate West Housing Project, showed friendship rates dropping significantly with each door further away people lived.
Wow.
Proximity usually fosters friendship because it increases opportunities for interaction. Of course, if there's initial antagonism, proximity can just intensify dislike.
So it amplifies whatever's already there.
Pretty much. It's often joked that fate conspires to place your perfect mate within walking distance. Maybe it's just probability and exposure working their magic.
And that leads to familiarity, right? Does just being familiar with someone make us like them more?
Exactly. Proximity works largely because it increases familiarity, and that leads us to the mere exposure effect. This is the fascinating phenomenon where familiarity alone, just being exposed to something repeatedly, increases liking for it.
Even if you don't interact with it.
Even then, studies show rats prefer music they've heard more often. Humans prefer nonsense syllables or even abstract shapes like Chinese characters they've seen more frequently, even if they can't consciously recall seeing them before.
It works unconsciously.
It does. It's why advertisers repeat commercials, why songs grow on you. There's even a fun mirror image study. It found that people generally prefer their mirror image, what they see every day, while their friends and lovers prefer their actual image, what they see. It's all about what you're most familiar with.
That's wild. Okay, what about similarity? Do opposites attract, or do birds of a feather flock together?
The research overwhelmingly supports birds of a feather. The old saying opposites attract is largely false when it comes to initial attraction and long-term relationships. People tend to pair up with others who are significantly similar to them across a whole range of characteristics.
Like what?
Sociological things like race, religion, age, education level, socioeconomic class, but also psychological traits like intelligence, core attitudes, values, even personality to some extent. And coming back to attractiveness, couples are also usually closely matched in physical attractiveness. Less attractive people tend to seek out partners who are similar to them in attractiveness level.
So we look for someone kind of like us.
It seems so. There's even a subtle effect called implicit egotism, where even arbitrary similarities like sharing the same initials or birthday can non-consciously increase liking. The idea is these things subtly remind us of ourselves, which feels good.
Our egos are working overtime, even when we don't realize it.
Something like that. And one more factor in liking is transference.
Transferring what?
Transferring feelings and assumptions about significant people from our past, like parents, old friends, ex-partners, onto new people who somehow remind us of them. An experiment showed participants automatically liked a new person more if that person resembled someone they liked from their past, and less if they resembled someone disliked.
So we're reacting to ghosts of relationships past.
In a way, yes. Those old relationship schemas get activated automatically.
Okay, that covers liking. But what about loving? Is love just strong liking taken to the extreme, or is it something fundamentally different?
It seems to be qualitatively different. While liking is a component, love involves distinct elements like attachment, deep caring, intimacy, and trust. It's interesting, actually, how the link between love and marriage has strengthened, at least culturally in places like the U.S. Survey data showed a big jump between 1967 and 1984 in the percentage of both men and women saying they would refuse to marry someone they didn't love.
Love became more of a prerequisite.
It seems so. One compelling theory about why we fall in love is the idea of self-expansion. The theory suggests we're motivated to enter relationships to expand our sense of self, gaining access to another person's resources, perspectives, identities, and experiences.
We grow through the relationship.
Exactly. Research supports this. University students showed a significant increase in the diversity of their self-descriptions, how many different ways they saw themselves after falling in love. The idea is that in really close relationships, we start to include the other in the self. We sometimes even get momentarily confused about which traits belong to us versus our partner.
That sounds like deep connection.
It is. And the sense of fusion, or overlapping selves, is actually a strong predictor of relationship longevity and satisfaction.
When we talk about love, are there different kinds?
Yes. Psychologists often distinguish between passionate love and companionate love. Passionate love is that intense emotional state you often see at the beginning of relationships. Tender and sexual feelings, elation, but also sometimes pain, anxiety, jealousy. It's thought to combine physiological arousal with the perception, the belief that this intense arousal is caused by the beloved.
The butterflies, the excitement. Great for starters.
Definitely great for getting things going. Companionate love, on the other hand, is more about deep affection for those with whom our lives are deeply intertwined. It's characterized by trust, caring, tolerance of flaws, warmth, and long-term affection. This is often seen as the sustaining force in long-term relationships.
The steady flame versus the initial fireworks.
That's a good way to put it. Companionate love generally requires conscious work and emphasizes equality and mutual support more than raw passion. Research suggests passionate love tends to decrease somewhat over time in long-term relationships, while companionate love often grows and becomes more central to relationship success.
That makes sense for long-term stability.
Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love offers a perhaps more nuanced view, suggesting love has three core components. There's intimacy, which is the emotional closeness, connection, and sharing. There's passion, which covers the motivational drives romance, physical attraction, sexual consummation. And there's commitment, which is the cognitive decision to maintain the love and the relationship over time.
Intimacy, passion, commitment. The triangle.
Right. And different combinations of these three components yield different types of love. For example, high passion but low intimacy and commitment would be infatuated love. High intimacy and commitment but low passion might be companionate love.
And the ideal is?
The ideal, according to the theory, is consummate love, which involves high levels of all three components, though maintaining that balance can be challenging.
No kidding. Now, how does evolution fit into this whole picture of attraction, love, and mating strategies?
Evolutionary psychology offers a different perspective. It suggests that humans likely evolved tendencies towards long-term pair bonding, primarily to ensure offspring survival. Human infants require a huge amount of care for a very long time compared to other species.
So pair bonds helped keep parents together to raise the kids.
That's the core idea. Now, there's a more controversial hypothesis stemming from this. It proposes that because men and women historically played different biological roles in reproduction, their evolved mating strategies might differ somewhat.
Okay, how so? This sounds contentious.
It is. The hypothesis suggests men, whose reproductive potential is less limited, might be predisposed to seek out multiple fertile partners, while women, who invest more biologically in each child, might be predisposed to seek mates with resources and commitment to help raise offspring. This leads to predictions like men will tend to prefer younger women, closer to peak fertility, while women will tend to prefer slightly older men, who have typically accumulated more resources and status.
And is there evidence for that?
Surprisingly, that general pattern, men preferring younger partners, women preferring older, has been observed in surveys across dozens of different cultures, 37 cultures in one major study.
But that's correlation, right? What are the criticisms of this evolutionary perspective? It sounds a bit deterministic.
It faces significant criticisms, absolutely. Many argue it's too deterministic and doesn't adequately account for social learning, cultural norms, and economic factors that could also explain these observed sex differences.
Like historical power imbalances between men and women.
Exactly. Or changing social roles. These could shape preferences just as much as, or maybe even more than, ancient evolutionary pressures. Another criticism is that evolutionary theory can sometimes seem like it can explain almost any outcome, even opposing ones, like both promiscuity and monogamy, which makes its specific predictions harder to test rigorously.
So it's a stimulating perspective, but not the whole picture.
Precisely. Despite the criticisms, evolutionary thinking has undeniably invigorated social psychology. It's prompted us to ask important questions about the potential evolutionary origins of our social information processing strategies, even if the answers are still debated.
Okay, so to bring it all back together then, it seems the core lesson weaving through all of this impressions, attitudes, attraction is understanding how our minds work when we interact with others. And especially appreciating the profound difference between those two modes of thinking, the quick automatic one and the slower, deliberate one.
Yes, exactly. This recognition of automatic versus effortful thinking has been incredibly influential. It's given rise to many important dual process theories across social psychology. We saw examples today, the continuum model of impression formation, moving from automatic categories to individuated judgments.
Right.
And the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion with its central and peripheral routes.
Both showing that interplay between automatic shortcuts and deliberate effort.
Precisely. And the empowering part, I think, is realizing that when we are able and willing to engage that effortful, deliberate thinking, we can actively curb stereotyping, we can resist superficial peripheral persuasion, and we can minimize the influence of things like transference from the past. We have some control.
What happens when we're busy, distracted, stressed, or just not paying close attention? Which is, let's be honest, a lot of them.
That's the crucial caveat, isn't it? That's precisely when we're most susceptible to falling back on automatic social cognition and behavior. The shortcuts take over. Knowing this, though, allows you to be more mindful. You can start to recognize when you might be relying on those quick mental shortcuts. And, crucially, decide when it's truly important to slow down, pay attention, and engage in more deliberate, thoughtful processing.
Okay, let's finish with a really crucial, maybe even provocative debate then. Given everything we've learned today about both the power and the pitfalls of our automatic thinking, should we trust it? Should we go with our gut?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's a strong case to be made for trusting it, at least a lot of the time. Automatic processes are, for the most part, predictable and reliable for everyday functioning. Our gut feelings, our attitudes, our emotions, even the unconscious thought that seems to underlie creative breakthroughs and some complex decision-making, these often reflect a vast amount of learned information processed quickly.
Like a highly efficient internal computer.
Exactly. If it's been fed good data through experience, it often produces useful outcomes, like instantly avoiding a bitter taste that might signal poison. Intuition, which is really a form of rapid automatic cognition, can be invaluable for complex decisions where you have a lot of experience, maybe buying a house or choosing a university if you've visited many. And true creativity often seems to bubble up from the unconscious after an initial period of conscious effort and information gathering. So yes, there's a lot of value there.
Okay, that's a compelling argument for the benefits of our autopilot. But what's the counter-argument? Where does automatic thinking lead us astray? Perhaps dangerously so.
Well, the counter-argument is pretty strong, too. We shouldn't trust it blindly, or maybe even not for the most important societal decisions. While fast and efficient for basic survival tasks, that same automatic thinking is often riddled with the stereotypes and prejudices we talked about. It can easily foster an us versus them mentality and inadvertently value social hierarchy, which runs counter to modern democratic ideals like equality and fundamental human rights.
So it's got built-in biases.
Definitely. And it can also lead to some shockingly irrational decisions based on emotional responses rather than logic. Like the finding that people are willing to donate more money to help one identifiable famine victim with a name and face than to help 8 anonymous victims. Logic says help the 8, but emotion drives helping the one you can picture.
Or fearing the wrong things.
Exactly. Fearing dramatic but rare events like shark attacks far more than common. But mundane risks like falling coconuts, even though coconuts are statistically much deadlier. Our fear system is automatic and easily triggered by vivid threats. A stark example was the aftermath of 9/11. People automatically shifted from flying to driving out of fear, despite driving being statistically about 65 times riskier per mile traveled.
That's a huge difference in risk.
It is. And that automatic fear response, that shift to driving, tragically led to an estimated 1,500 additional road traffic deaths in the year following the attacks. Automatic fear led to a less safe choice. And on a personal level, it can lead to impulsive actions. We deeply regret lighting that cigarette, making that bet, saying that hurtful thing in anger.
So what's the ultimate takeaway then for you, our listener, about relying on these two powerful modes of thought? When should you trust your gut? When should you really hit the brakes and think?
It's about discernment, really. Well, we can't just turn off our autopilot, and we wouldn't want to. It handles so much we need to be smart about when we rely on it. For simple, everyday survival tasks, for things you have deep expertise in, yeah, trust your gut. It's built for speed and efficiency in those domains. But for complex decisions, especially those involving other people, fairness, ethics, for avoiding prejudice, for resisting manipulation, or for anything where the stakes are high and nuance really matters. Do yourself a favor, take a few extra moments, pay attention, question your first impulse, and consciously engage your controlled, deliberate thinking. Because as this chapter really highlights, a life lived entirely on automatic pilot can indeed be, as Hobbes might say, nasty, brutish, and short-sighted.
That's a powerful conclusion. What's truly fascinating, looking back at everything we've discussed, is just how much of our social world, from who we connect with to how we interpret a simple interaction, is shaped by these often invisible automatic processes running under the surface.
It's profound, isn't it? And if we connect this back to you listening, it really raises an important question to consider going forward. Now that you know about these two powerful modes of social cognition, the automatic and the deliberate, and how they influence you constantly, how will you consciously choose when to engage your deliberate thinking to shape your own impressions, your attitudes, and your interactions more justly, more accurately, and more effectively in the world around you?